Okay, so we're going to talk about the units 2 and 3 of the DPSI exam, which are basically the site translations. So first of all, we're going to talk about the structure of the oral exam. We've already discussed this before, but we're going to cover it, very briefly again, just to remind you guys. Then we're going to talk a little bit about uh, the site translation. We're going to talk first about preparation, then the actual delivery of the site translation, and we're going to finish off with some, um, just general recommendations on the specific unit. So first of all, structure of the exam. This is just a reminder. So the exam is divided into two parts: oral exam and written exam. The oral exam consists of 3 units. Unit 1 is role play, and that's basically consists of 2 role plays. Unit 2 is a site translation, and unit 3 is another site translation. Yeah, so we're not going to look at role play just now, unit 1. We're going to look at units 2 and 3. Unit 2 is a site translation from your other language into English. Unit 3 is a site translation from English into your other language. So you have to do these both ways. There's no break between these units. So, you're going to be given a date and time to connect to online to your call for your exam. Pardon me. You will connect at a given date and time. You will start your first role play, then you'll do your second role play, then you do first site translation, you do second site translation. There's no actual gap in between. There's no toilet breaks as such. You just basically crack on with it, and within 50 minutes or 1 hour, say at the most, but within 15 minutes, you've completed your whole oral exam. Okay. There will be 3 people in addition to yourself connected to the call. Um, 2 interlocutors, which are basically the 2 people that are reading the role play in both languages. One in my case, it would be one in Portuguese, one in English, because I would be doing Portuguese. And there'll be an examiner as well, who's a bilingual speaker. So the examiner, in my case, would speak Portuguese and English. You probably won't see the examiner. They will have their microphone and their camera switched off, but they will be there on the call and they will be assessing you in real time. Okay. And this is important to know. You will get a grade on the day. So the examiner will assess you there and then. And the examiners typically get between something like 20 minutes in between candidates. Sometimes a bit more than that, but generally they can get as little as 20 minutes, maximum 40 minutes, say, between candidates, depending. Um, but basically, you will get a grade, and whatever grade you get, that's it. The results will be moderated. That means a percentage of the exams will then go to a kind of second marker for quality control. But the odds are that whatever grade you get on the day, that's your final grade. Um, you don't know what that grade is. The interlocutors don't know what that grade is. Only the examiner knows what the grade is. They fill in their reports and they send them directly to the Institute of Linguists. The reason why I'm telling you this is because it's important. It's important to be aware of these, um, because of what I'm going to suggest to you in a minute. Okay, and it's important to realize that um, examiners are human. Examiners might not necessarily be specialists of the topic which they're assessing. They should be, but quite often they're not. And especially doing Scottish law online, we don't know who the examiners are going to be, but the odds are that there might be someone down south, for example, who will most definitely not be a specialist in Scottish law. Um, and being human and being specialists or not, they're fallible and they will miss stuff. So you have to kind of try and use that factor to your advantage. Um, the exams are recorded. They are recorded, and if you want to ask for a remark or if you want to lodge an appeal, you can, and the recording will be, listened to by a different examiner in that specific circumstance. But generally speaking, recordings are not listened to again. They're only listened to again in the case of moderation, or for the purposes of moderation, or for the purposes of evaluating remark or appeal request. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is that the examiner himself or herself will not go back and listen to the recording to kind of try and spot whether you made any mistakes. If you made a mistake and the examiner didn't notice, they didn't notice. Okay, you got away with it. Um, for that reason, it is important that you come across as confident and professional to the examiner so that he or she will give you the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so this is very important to realize. It is important that you come across as confident and professional to the examiner so that he or she will give you the benefit of the doubt. It's important to play on the fact that examiners are human and they're fallible and they will miss stuff. Okay. Right, unit two, and when I say unit two, I mean unit two and three. Units two and three have got the best pass rates out of all the units in the exam. However, you still need a game plan for the exam. And what I mean by a game plan is a methodology, an approach, um, a strategy, if you wish. You know, in other words, you should know exactly what you're doing when you walk into the exam room and in what order you're doing it. Or, I didn't bother updating this presentation. I should have written, you should know exactly what you're doing when you connect to your remote call for the exam and in what order you're doing it. So you should have a good understanding what the exam consists of. You should have a good understanding what it is the examiners are looking for and what you're assessed on. And you should have a plan on how you're going to deliver that. Okay. You should practice your game plan. Okay, whatever game plan, whatever strategy you come up with, it's important that you practice it. If you go into the exam with an idea of a strategy, but you haven't tried to practice it, it's not going to work out very well. I can guarantee you that. And a final thing to be aware of, your game plan might be different to someone else's. So, um, what we're going to do here today, I'm going to give you a suggestion of a game plan, but it's just a suggestion. It doesn't mean that you have to follow that. It doesn't mean you have to do that. Um, what I would suggest is that if you haven't done the exam before, if you haven't done sight translation before in real life, try this game plan, try this approach, see if it works for you. If it doesn't work for you, then change it. The important is that you do have some sort of approach to tackle the exam. Okay. So I'll give you an example of my game plan in a minute. But first of all, just a quick recap of what Unit 2 sight translation and Unit 3 consist of. So it's each unit is a 10-minute exam. It's a 10-minute test. And that's divided into 5 minutes preparation and 5 minutes delivery. So you're given a text. If you're doing the text online, the interlocutors will use the screen share function, like I'm doing just now. They will screen share with you the text for sight translation, and they will give you 5 minutes to read through it. That's your 5 minutes preparation. After your 5 minutes preparation are finished, they will then give you 5 minutes to deliver a verbal translation of that text. You are not allowed to make any annotations during this part of the exam. So you are expected to take notes during Unit 1 role play, but you're not allowed to take notes during Units 2 and 3. It's a little bit confusing at first, but once you start practicing, you'll become second nature. So no annotations allowed in this part of the exam. Don't ask me why there's no annotations allowed. It makes no sense, but it is what it is. No reference materials allowed. So you're not allowed to check any dictionaries, glossaries. You're not allowed to check your phone. You're not allowed to go on the internet to look for terms. It's just you and the text. Um, how does the Institute of Linguists check that you're not using any reference materials? I don't ask me. I have no idea. As far as I'm aware, they don't use any proctoring for the oral examination, but the interlocutor will be looking at you through a camera. Okay, make it to make sure that you don't cheat. Um, the site translations could be on any topic. So you're given a topic for Unit 1, the role play, but you are not given topics for the site translation. They could be any topic. They're often current topics, but not always. And the text stays in front of you, as I've mentioned. Going back to the topic, so this is arguably one of the most unfair parts of the examination. I said before that it's one of the easiest parts of the exam, but it's also one of the most unfair parts of the exam because you don't know what the text is going to be about, and you're only given 5 minutes to study it, and you're not allowed to ask any questions. Now, this does in no way replicate what happens in real life. Okay, um, but it is what it is. Now, you'll find that quite often texts are of a general nature. They tend not to be too technical, too complex, and we're going to get some examples of that in a minute. We're going to show you some past papers. Um, we, but sometimes they can be on obscure topics, and they can be on topics that you would never ever encounter in real life, or you would very, 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 very rarely encounter in real life. Okay, so and this is where having a game plan or an approach and really knowing how this exam works might count towards your advantage. So if it's an easy text, then it's an easy text, and you do it no problem, and then everybody's happy. If it's a difficult text, then you need to try and pass somehow. Okay, and this is where you know uh, these might be helpful to you. So I'm going to give you an example of a game plan. My game plan consists of 3 steps, as I've already explained. Step one: read the text fully. So I've lost count how many times in the exam, but also sometimes in practice in the class, we're doing a side translation exam or a side translation drill, and I give students 5 minutes to prepare, and after 5 minutes I'll ask, okay, well, you ready now, please have a go. um, and I get a response, oh, I'm only halfway, I've only read half the text, but I'll have a go anyway. Or I'm not even finished the first paragraph, but I'll just have a go anyway. So it's very important that you read the full text. Whether it's an easy text or whether it's a difficult text, it's important that you read the full text. And this is why my suggestion is that your first step is not identify legal terminology, think about problems, whatever. The first stage is read the text. Just read the text. Forget about everything else. Just read it. Okay? And that'll take you 1 minute tops to read. The texts are about 150, 170 words long. So you can easily read them, in a minute. Second step, research the text. And when I say research, I mean research it here in your mind, because obviously you're not allowed to use any any reference materials. So that would involve things like identifying any legal terminology, jargon, and tricky words. Um, is the text talking about culpable homicide, for example? And in your legal system, there's no direct equivalent for culpable homicide. How would you deal with that? Is the text talking about sheriff courts? And in your legal system, you don't have sheriff courts. So how you would deal with that? Is the text, the text we're looking at this morning earlier was talking about the American system adopting the English system, lock, stock, and barrel. Okay, what does that idiom mean? Okay, how would I translate it? For example, if that appeared in the exam. So that kind of thing you want to try and identify. Identify any grammatical structures that might pose translation problems. So, not just terminology, but also the grammar, the syntax itself. You know, is the syntax significantly different from what you would have in your target translation? Are there, complex sentences with lots of subclauses? Are there very long sentences that might need, significantly restructured or reworked to make sense in the target language? So that's the kind of thing that you would think about, at this stage. Um, and then very, very, very important is not only to identify these problems, but to make a decision on how to deal with these problems. Okay, so as I said before, I started off by saying, look, the exams are recorded, but the examiner will not listen back to the recording. I can guarantee you that 100% the examiner will not listen back to the recording. They don't have time. They do not have time. No matter how dedicated they are, they do not have time to listen back to the recordings. They won't. Okay. So if they miss something, they miss something. Okay. If you translate culpable homicide in some random manner, whichever way you decide to translate it, and I've already mentioned that the examiner might not be a specialist in Scottish law. And I know lots of examiners who are assessing Scottish law, they're not specialists in Scottish law. And vice versa, examining health, they're not specialists in health by any stretch of the imagination. So they will miss stuff and they won't know stuff. And some examiners don't even bother reading the texts in advance. A lot of them do. They're more, they take it a little bit more serious, but there's the examiners that don't. Okay. So you have to bank on all these facts. Okay. So if you say something and you say it confidently, the examiner might take your word for it, start second guessing himself or herself. Oh, I thought he was this, but maybe it's not. He sounds like he knows what he's saying. So, okay, fair enough. Um, or B, they might miss it. They might not even notice because they focus on something else. They're assessing you real time. Maybe they're thinking about the previous sentence, maybe a mistake they made in the previous sentence, or something, maybe because you're so elegant and eloquent in the previous sentence, they're making a note about that. Um, and they miss then the mistake that you make in the subsequent sentence. Okay. So you have to play on that fact and try and turn that to your advantage to try and basically tip the skills in your favor, because as I said before, this exam is not fair. The way it's assessed is not fair. The way it's designed is not fair. It does not replicate the way things work in real life, but it is what it is. We have to play the game, so we might try and play the game to our advantage. Okay. And step three, then finally, with whatever time you have left, you do a mental sight translation to yourself. Okay. So that would mean you actually sitting there mentally, sight translating the text into Portuguese or into English, depending on your language. Um, Now, the odds are that you will run out of time if you follow this game plan. You will run out of time probably at some point in this stage. So you won't have time to do a full mental sight translation. It's just a way to use up the remainder of your time. Um, Doing this is important, though. Once you've identified your problems, what you think are going to be problems, and make a decision on how to deal with them, and you have to make a very quick decision, because it's only 5 minutes in total for these. Doing the mental side translation is important, because one thing I always say and I always encourage you to do is to pick up a text, any text from any book or any past paper, whatever, at home in your own time, and do a side translation. Okay. And then do it again straight after. Do it a second time. And the second time is going to be better than the first time. 100% is going to sound more eloquent, more relaxed, more confident. You might, your syntax, your grammar might even be more accurate, more precise, more appropriate. So it's going to be better. And basically, what we're trying to do here is to try and replicate that process. The second time you do a second side translation is always better than the first. So this is the game plan. These are the 3 steps. Once again, you can adapt it to your own needs. You know, um, I would suggest that whatever game plan you come up with, your step one should always be to read the text fully. Once you've fully read the text, then you can decide to deal with it as you want. Some people prefer to do this first, do the mental side translation first. Yeah, fine, whatever, man. Whatever works for you. Whatever works for you. As long as you've got a system that works for you and you know how to use up those 5 minutes efficiently, because 5 minutes will disappear very quickly if you're not using them efficiently. Okay. This step, this this mental site translation step will also allow you to identify further mistakes. So this is another advantage of doing this mental site translation. You might have missed something here on step 2 that you can then identify just by having a go at actually translating the text. And it's better to identify those problems before you have to do the site translation for the examiner, as I've already explained. Okay, a couple of things, a couple of recommendations you shouldn't do. Should not tell the examiner you're ready. Okay, so what I mean here is, everybody's nervous about the site translation because you don't know the topics. Then people get the site translation and they go, bail. Oh, thank God, I know what bail is. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, that's fine. It's easy. Yeah, I'll go for it. Yeah, I'm ready. If you say that, then they'll say, okay, that's fine. You can start. Yeah, and you'll skip your remainder preparation time. Do not do that under any circumstances. My recommendation is always use up your time, even if the text appears easy. Always force yourself to go through the process, because at first glance some texts are easy, but then once you start sight translating them, you'll realize that they're actually quite tricky, because maybe from a terminological point of view they're not difficult. Maybe there's no difficult terminology in them, but maybe there's idioms, There's collocations, there's expressions you can't translate literally. You have to think a little bit about how to translate them into your language elegantly. So it's always worth using up your full preparation time. Do not ask the examiner how much time you've got left. Okay, just stay focused on studying the text. They'll tell you once your 5 minutes are up. There's no point, checking the clock every 30 seconds, because that's just going to distract you from the task at hand, which is, basically preparing the text. Just focus on preparing the text. They'll tell you when your time is up. Okay. And try not to get distracted with anything else. It's kind of difficult, especially because most of you, or all of you, probably will be doing this exam from home. There might be, dogs barking next door, the kids shouting, fighting, jumping up and down on the sofa in the living room, and I don't know, whatever. I'm sure there'll be plenty of things that might, um, take away your focus. But just as much as possible, obviously, try to stay focused on the task at hand. It's important. Um, you know, 5 minutes go by really quickly if you start getting distracted with telling the kids to be quiet or whatever. um Next thing you know, your 5 minutes are gone, and then you mess up your site translation, and then you have to reset it and pay another 190 quid to do it. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. I don't think anybody wants to give the institute money for nothing. So as much as possible, obviously, try and stay focused on what you're doing. And this relates to this first one as well. Okay. It's only a few extra minutes of your life. Do not be in a rush to finish the exam. Use up your full time. It's there for your advantage. Use it up to increase your odds of passing the exam. When it comes to delivery, take your time. Do not read too fast. So one of the things we're going to do when we do site translation is that we're going to time each other to see how long it takes us to, actually do a site translation. And part of the reason why we do that is to help you to understand how quickly or how slowly you should be talking. Okay. Um, Generally speaking, if you speak at a moderate speed, you will finish the site, and if you don't get stuck in any specific words, you should finish the site translation within about 2 minutes. Yeah, on average, a little bit less, a little bit more. Um, Most people will finish the site translation between just under 2 minutes and 3 minutes and a half. For the kind of slower people. Um, you need to be really. There's a misconception that you're going to run out of time if you don't read fast. Okay, and if you as a preparation for the course, I asked you to watch that video where they had the mock exam. I know some of you haven't, but most of you hopefully have. And when they talk about site translation, they say, "Oh, she's reading too slowly. She's going to run out of time, and if she runs out of time, the exam won't be finished. She'll fail." It's a bit misleading, because that's not going to happen. Okay. Yes, if you run out of time, they'll stop the exam, and then if you missed more than 5%, it's an automatic fail. Um, but that's not going to happen. 99% guarantee that that is not going to happen. What the opposite is more likely to happen, that you read too fast, and because you read too fast, you are not speaking clearly and confidently. You're speaking fast, you're sounding anxious and nervous, and it's too fast for the examiner to understand, especially through Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever package they use. And they can't understand half of what you said. You maybe you won't have time to correct yourself, because you're just going at 200 miles an hour and you're afraid you're going to run out of time, and you might get stuck on terminology and so on. So uh, do not read too fast. Read slowly. In your preparation, in your drills, when you're drilling this in the class, uh, practice going slowly and then see how long that takes. Okay. Practice speaking clearly and confidently. Remember the marking criteria. There's three broad assessment criteria: accuracy, delivery, and language use. Yeah. Accuracy, yeah, how correctly you translate it. Language use, yeah, how correct your language is, how appropriate the register, the grammatical structures, and so on and so forth. And then delivery, it's one marking category on its own. In other words, how clear you are, whether you come across as confident, whether you're easy to understand, whether you're easy to follow. If you're speaking very fast, you're not going to be clear, and you're not going to be sound confident. You're not going, you won't be stopping at punctuation and so on. So practice going slowly. Do not be afraid to correct yourself or to stop to think about something. Part of the advantage of drilling site translations and knowing exactly that on average how long it takes you to do them when you go at a certain speed is to then know, to give you the confidence that you can stop and think about stuff if you get stuck. Yeah, you had your 5 minutes preparation time, but sometimes, quite often, that's not enough to identify every single problem. So there might be other problems there. You might get stuck somewhere. Stop and think about it. Okay, you don't necessarily get marked down for that. Okay, not necessarily, or even if you do, it's only a minor markdown for delivery. Okay, um, do not be afraid to correct yourself. If you make a significant error and you realize, do not be afraid to go back and correct it. Will you be marked down for doing that? Possibly, possibly, maybe even probably, but you'll be a minor markdown. But if you make a significant mistake, that's probably going to be worse, and it could even be a fatal error that makes you fail the whole unit. So, if in doubt, correct yourself. Yeah. And once again, try to sail smoothly over terminology you're unsure of. Or in other words, try not to draw the examiner's attention to terminology you're not sure of. Okay, for the reasons I've already explained. Unlike in real life, during the exam, you're not allowed to ask for clarification or terms of expression. So if there's something you don't know in the text, do not ask. Do not ask, what does this word mean? Okay, do not ask for clarification because they won't give it to you. They'll just mark you down. Same applies for the role play. Do not ask for clarification. You are assessed on how you deal with those terms and expressions. I know. I think the institute at times have said, you can ask for clarification, and it's a bit vague what they mean by that. But I can tell you from real life that examiners will not explain things to you. Okay, and if there's terminology you don't know for certain, they will not clarify that for you. I think maybe what they mean by clar- clarification would be instances, for example, where there's mistakes in the text, there's errors in the text, and unfortunately that happens quite a lot for some languages. There's grammatical mistakes that basically mean that the text doesn't actually make any sense. Examiners should spot this in advance and correct them. Usually they don't. Usually they're not aware that they're supposed to. Um, so um, what do you do in that kind of circumstance? You've got text that doesn't make any sense. And if you just have a go, you might be marked down because it didn't make any sense. You should say something for sure. In those circumstances, you should say something. Look, there's an error in the original. I did my best according to what I understood was the meaning, something like that. Okay, and then you should also tell me after the exam, so that I can tell the Institute of Linguists. Okay, so that you cover all bases. So that basically that is taken into account when you're assessed, and that you're not unduly penalized for that. Okay, which in practice you might still be, but hopefully you won't be. We've already talked about this. You want to avoid drawing the examiner's attention to something you're unsure of, and you want to trick the examiner into thinking you are better than you are. Okay, because examiners are human, like I explained before. And if you've not already read that handbook that we looked at in the first session, it's in the class server. Go and please read it. So you don't have to study it, but you should read it so you have an understanding of what the assessment criteria is. Now, things to avoid: poor intonation. Once again, um, poor intonation comes with nerves and comes with trying to do things in a rush. So once again, try and speak clearly and intelligibly. Avoid mumbling. Okay. Some people think that if they don't know something, they'll just go, then they'll get away with it. The odds are that the opposite will happen, and you'll just get marked down for that. Okay, because if the examiner can't hear you, they can't mark you. They can't pass you. Lack of confidence. So some people are too honest for their own good, and they kind of, their body language, their intonation, their voice shows when they're unsure of something. If that's your case, we'll have to work on that a little bit. Other people are great actors, and if they pretend to be confident in a much more natural way. Nerves plays a lot into these as well. So um, we'll need to work on this for sure with some people. But yeah, for the exam, try and pretend that you know what you're talking about. Okay, even if you're feeling nervous, even if you know that your hands are shaking, there's nothing you can do about that. Maybe try and focus on your voice, making sure that your voice sounds, confident. Yeah, and your body language, your demeanor, your presentation, your stature, the way you sit, and so on. Avoid stopping in odd places. So follow punctuation. That's basically what I mean here. Yeah, punctuation is your friend. Follow punctuation. You'd be surprised how many people do not follow punctuation. Also, because a lot of us, we're not used to reading out loud unless we've got small kids. I now have small kids, so I'm now used to reading out loud. But before that, the only time I would ever read out loud would be when I was doing site translations for clients. Apart from that, when I'm reading a book to myself and I'm sitting there in the living room with my wife, I'm not reading out loud because if I do, she'll tell me to shut up because she's trying to do something else. It's just something most people don't do on a regular basis, I suppose. Avoid double solutions. So these would be, for example, where you've got a word and you can maybe translate it in many different ways because we've already been talking about how we have to deal with the issue of non-equivalence. But let's imagine we've got the term sheriff court, and in this particular text, I could translate it as, I could translate it as criminal court. I could translate it as middle tier court. I could translate it as a first instance court because in this case it is a first instance court. I could translate it in different ways. None of them are 100% perfect because there's no perfect way of translating these without actually paraphrasing the meaning substantially. Um, but maybe several of them I think would be adequate in this context, but then I'm not unsure which one is best or which one is ideal, and I'm a bit nervous which one the examiner is going to accept. So I'll just say two of them. I'll just say criminal stroke first instance courts. Okay, or written translation, people do that a lot, for example. Don't do that. You'll just get penalized. Basically what's going to happen is that the examiner is going to look at that and they're going to assess the paper as if there was no word there, as if you hadn't given any. By doing that, you're trying to cover all bases. You're doing the opposite in practice. You're basically not covering any bases, any base. So it's best to choose one. Just choose one. Whatever. If you're not sure which one's best, just pick one at random. And yeah, I always say that as interpreters and translators, we have to make decisions and we have to live with the consequences of our decisions. So just make a decision. Just make an educated guess, make a professional guess what in your professional judgment, because we're professionals, what in your professional judgment is most adequate. What you would do in real life. Yeah. One final note about breathing. Remember to breathe during the exam. With nerves, people forget to breathe. Practice breathing in the correct places. In other words, practice breathing when punctuation tells you to breathe. Punctuation is your friend, is there to remind you, take a breath, full stop, take a breath. Don't go on to the next sentence before you breathe. Because if you do, you'll run out of oxygen at some point. Um, you'll make you sound awkward. Even if you're confident, if you're not breathing properly, if you're not following punctuation, it does make you sound awkward. And some examiners interpret that as lack of confidence, even if it might not be. That's how it's interpreted. Um, if you run out of oxygen because you forgot to breathe, you will get nervous. I've actually seen this happening physically in the exam. You can physically see it in people, which is actually amazing. So that's why I'm talking about this. Some of you will be doing this very naturally. Some of you won't. Um, Normally, all of this can be corrected by following punctuation, by going slowly and following punctuation. Yeah. Final tip: pretend this is just another job. If you're an experienced interpreter, and you're a little bit nervous because it's an exam, try and do a bit of visualization. Forgets you're in the exam room or forgets that you're connected to a Zoom call for the exam. Try and picture that guy as the solicitor, that guy as the criminal, um, or that guy is your service user that you're doing the side translation for. Just pretend it's just another job. Okay, that might help. It might not. I don't know. Everybody's different, but it's just a suggestion that might help for you. Someone pointed out the other day that, well, if I pretend it's just another job, then normally the average client that I get tends to be of a kind of lower education level. So would I be supposed to do that for the exam as well? Not really. No, you're supposed to keep the register um, uh, um, at an appropriate level for the type of text you got. So you wouldn't be, in other words, you wouldn't be, for the purposes of the exam, you wouldn't be expected to dumb down the text. Okay, because you imagine, okay, the client is, is it didn't go to school or whatever. For the purpose of the exam, you'd expect your client to be an average person with an average education level. Okay, and you would site translate or translate the text accordingly. In real life, that might be very well different. And in real life, by all means, you should modulate um, how you interpret things, how you translate things, depending on the target audience, in this case, on your clients. And that's everything for now. Thank you very much for your attention.